Welcome to Optimal, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dicken Weatherby, and this podcast and my website all focus on one thing, and that's the quest for optimal health. Our goal is to help your patients achieve optimal health so they can experience an optimal life. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google, and Spotify. And also make sure to go over to optimaldx.com and check out our resources on the site. Now, without any further delay, is today's episode. Hello and welcome. This is Dr. Weatherby from Optimal DX. Welcome to another episode of Optimal, the podcast. And I'm joined as ever by Beth Ellen in Naples, Florida. How are you doing, Beth?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you.
So it seems like every time that we do a podcast, there's some kind of hurricane or natural disaster heading towards the East Coast. I think we're clear right now. I mean, maybe the hurricane season is coming to an end, but I think you survived Ophelia, you survived Lee.
Yeah, we were lucky. Everything turns. They turn into the north now, so we're very lucky today.
But you said it was very hot and humid there. So
yes, today's very humid.
Yeah. Well, fall is on the way here in Southern Oregon. I'm very excited to have us a guest today, Dr. Julia Mikowski from Doctor's Data. And she will be joining us to talk about her experience with Doctor's Data and just chatting generally about health and medicine and optimal health and wellness. Anyway, Dr. Malkowski graduated with a doctorate in Naturopathic Medicine in December of 2017 with advanced standing, and also a doctorate in Chiropractic Medicine in April 2016 from National University of Health Sciences. She completed biomedical treatment for autism spectrum disorders seminars, fundamentals in functional blood chemistry, mastering the thyroid, and 100 hours in functional neurology applied to childhood neurobehavioral disorders. She began her career in naturopathic medicine after seeing firsthand its excellent results at restoring the health of her infant son, and she is now working full-time with Doctor's Data. Welcome, Dr. Mikowski, to Optimal, the podcast. I love the personal aspect because obviously my introduction to naturopathic medicine came from watching my dad as a young boy getting sick with kidney disease and going to a naturopathic physician in southern England who really focused on his quality of life more than just keeping him alive. And that was sort of, for me as an 8 to 10-year-old coming back from boarding school and seeing this man who'd always been sick most of my life with sort of color in his cheeks and a little bit more energy was definitely an inspiration. So I know you had a firsthand experience restoring the health of your infant son. If you have a moment, I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Maybe tell the listeners a bit about your own personal journey and how you became involved in the field of healthcare and preventative medicine.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me here today and the ability to have this conversation. So I do appreciate this. Yeah, so I do understand your experience with naturopathic medicine, functional medicine, in that I did come to it upon a personal understanding as well, in that when my son was born, as all parents want, healthy children, there's nothing better in the world than healthy child, a healthy infant. He actually at 3 months old had a severe rash, and that was absolutely heartbreaking. And at the time, his pediatrician was regarded as one of the top pediatricians in the Chicagoland area. And he had told me it is nothing to worry about. It's just something topical, maybe something from the detergent, topical dermatitis. And that did not sit right with me because it was not going away. And I actually had started developing that same rash at that time. So it was very heartbreaking and discerning that my child was just deemed to have this affliction by the top ranking pediatrician in the area. So at that time, I was working at a health food store, a local health food store. And somebody there had said, you know what, you might want to see a naturopathic doctor. And this was completely new to me. I had never heard of it before, as I'm sure many people can relate to that experience as a practitioner, but then also as a patient, right? This is something that we're not normally exposed to. And as soon as I walked in, the doctor took one look at it, and she said she took one look at my rash as well, which the pediatrician did not do. And she said, Julia, you are very healthy, but you're allergic to dairy. And you did not have a rash before because your body was able to compensate. But after pregnancy and nursing, your body's no longer able to compensate and you cannot digest the dairy. It is showing in your skin and then also in your son's skin because he's having difficulty digesting that as well. And this was all new to me, and the way that she connected the skin presentation with the liver function, with the nutrition, that was a completely new concept to me. And it did resonate with me. So she said right away at that time to discontinue dairy consumption, and the rash would resolve within 2 weeks. And we did. And lo and behold, both of us resolved rashes within 1 week. So that was quite the remarkable experience.
When we talk to our naturopathic colleagues, you'll probably find that that's, a relatively common experience that they have with patients. But like you said, for you hadn't been exposed to naturopathic medicine. So it was probably quite revelatory to have such a quick response. So where did you go from there? And it sounds like you kind of got the bug, so to speak, about natural medicine, and you began your journey to become a naturopathic physician. And it sounds like a chiropractor as well.
Yes, exactly. Right away. I started immediately and started that path. At that point, I actually did not complete my bachelor's degree. So I went directly into pre-med to complete my bachelor's degree and then followed that with my doctorate in chiropractic and my doctorate in naturopathic medicine. And that was all at National University of Health Sciences outside Chicago, Illinois. This is actually one of the oldest naturopathic schools in the country.
I always thought that my alma mater was the oldest naturopathic university in the country.
Who wants to be the oldest?
Who wants to be the oldest, right? We want to be Bastille University, right?
Yeah. So that's, that is an interesting point. And I don't know exactly who was first, but I do know National University of Health Sciences had that program and it was very short-lived. So it was, yes. And then it became a chiropractic school mainly. And then they added the naturopathic program back again in 2008.
Oh, it's fantastic. Well, it sounds like, how long have you been in practice? So it sounds like you graduated in 2016 as a chiropractic physician, 2017. Did you go straight into private practice?
Correct. Yes. So I actually was in private practice with my chiropractic degree in Illinois. We are licensed primary care practitioners. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as I had that chiropractic degree, I was able to practice. Correct.
Excellent. And so what is, so now you're working with doctors' data. And so tell us a little bit about your sort of current focus on the work that you do with them.
Yeah. So Doctors Data is an excellent laboratory right outside Chicago as well. And Doctors Data offers a variety of testing options that really that go beyond the sometimes narrow scope of traditional testing. One of our tests that I am really involved in, and I just cannot stop researching because once you go down this rabbit hole, it's deep. It's the microbiome. So we do offer the GI 360 test, and this test is a functional assessment of the gastrointestinal microbiome. It really is all-encompassing. It includes a microbiome abundance and diversity information, including dysbiosis index, and that's via PCR. Also including the cultures, so the traditional microbiology culture that's still gold standard for dysbiotic bacteria and yeast. And then we're looking at the markers of digestion, absorption, immunology, also parasitology, and then, of course, looking for pathogens within the microbiome as well.
Wow. So a really very, very functional view of the microbiome, digestion, absorption. Do you look at markers for intestinal permeability?
So we do offer fecal zonulin. Now, as you may be aware, fecal zonulin does fluctuate because that intestinal barrier is constantly changing. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about nutrition, but the standard American diet does induce intestinal permeability with the sugars and the alcohol and the gluten. So fecal zonulin does change. We do offer that test. We also offer serum zonulin. And our serum zonulin does correlate with the lactulose mannitol drink test. So you will get the same results.
Just wondering, does anyone actually do that drink test anymore? I mean, that was sort of...
It's fading out for sure.
Yeah.
And the other cool thing about GI 360, though, is we are looking at specific bacteria which are associated with that mucosal barrier. As an example, Akkermansia muciniphila, which is a very popular bacteria these days, does significantly contribute to that. So we're measuring that value, and potentially these bacteria that contribute to mucosal barrier integrity can predict intestinal permeability as these bacteria diminish in their populations. Mucosal barrier can also diminish, and then that can lead to intestinal permeability. So there's a multitude of information on the report.
How can you get them to colonize? Can you add back Akkermansia?
So with regards to that bacteria, it really does enjoy polyphenols, and pomegranates is largely talked about in that area, but green tea, blueberries, things of that nature. And we can talk about this, but there's different theories, right? So just adding one bacterium to the giant population might not be the best approach, but if you're going to use a dietary approach and you're adding polyphenols, this is going to support other bacteria populations as well versus a monotherapeutic probiotic, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I wonder too, if someone's had everything wiped out, can you add back something though, not just feed it, but add back the good guys? Will they really colonize?
Yeah, so sometimes we do see that, but sometimes we actually do see that patients are on probiotics and they don't improve the reports. And actually, one of the matrices that can be evaluated in that regard is called microbiome diversity. And we're measuring that on our report. Diversity is very important with regards to any ecologic system. And in the colon, we find that as well. So studies have shown that when a patient has a diverse microbiome and they're given probiotics, it does repopulate. And then when patients have lack of microbiome diversity, it is more difficult to repopulate. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
And so it looks like Doctor's Data has a lot of other areas of specialty as well: cardiometabolic, endocrinology, environmental exposure, detoxification. I think you have some nutritional and toxic essential elements. Are there any particular areas that you feel Doctor's Data is really, pushing the boundaries in terms of where to take testing in these particular areas?
Yeah, so I would say we are constantly looking at this and moving the needle, where we can. Everything we do in medicine, we can always improve, right? So broadly speaking, yes. So with the stool testing, we actually just published data, antibiogram data. So this is all of the bacteria, all the isolates that we have collected during a year's time. We have, as a lab, a large volume, about 10,000 samples, and we have the data with regards to the specific bacteria and yeast and the prescriptive and natural agents. So we are able to report that information. So that's for in the stool realm. With the cardiometabolic profile, we have an excellent profile, and we are actually working internally on updating it right now. So we're going to actually add probably two more analytes there, most likely regarding insulin sensitivity, because insulin sensitivity is so important. And when we talk about glucose metabolism, when we talk about longevity, even when we talk about the immune health and this recent pandemic. So insulin sensitivity is very important. We're talking and talks about adding that. And then even with our cardiometabolic panel, I was just speaking last week with a patient about they were very disheartened that their primary care doctor had only ran total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, and triglycerides. And I think that they did VLDL in this case as well. And they had done their own research and they said, why did my doctor run these? None of these are going to provide any information. So with our cardiometabolic panel, that is one portion of the test, but then we have oxidized LDL, we have small dense LDL. So we really go beyond the standard markers.
Great. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
What do you think the best way is to actually measure the body burden of toxins, including glyphosate, if you could address that briefly?
That's a great question. So we don't have a test for glyphosate. We do have 3 tests that would address detoxification. We do measure RBC glutathione, so we can absolutely measure that. We do have an hepatic detox profile, which measures phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. So phase 1 is exposure, phase 2 is conjugation. And then we also have hepatic detox profile, which measures we have the DNA oxidative damage assay, which measures how much of the DNA has been damaged. And the hepatic detox and the DNA damage assay are urinary tests.
Urinary. Okay, I was going to ask that. Excellent.
Yeah.
Because body burden, people are concerned, and sometimes it's hard to tell. I know they did the cord blood tests years ago, and there were 270 different chemicals in a child's cord blood when it was born. And I think it's something we don't look at enough. And we did a little piece just the other day on detoxification. So that's one of my favorite areas to talk about because everybody's exposed. I don't know if there's anybody that could really not be exposed to toxins in the world that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yes.
I think, one of the other interesting things is really the medium in which we're collecting information. Obviously, we are very involved with blood chemistry analysis and what we can glean from serum and things like that. But, when you're looking at toxins, there's hair testing, there's urine testing, there's, I guess, some stool testing, potentially even serum elements that can be measured as well. And so it can get somewhat confusing if you're a relatively new practitioner coming to this field and you're like, all right, what do I do? Do I do hair? Do I do urine? Do I do serum? Do I stool? I'm just kind of curious sort of if you have like a triage that you kind of look at or if there's a particular medium that you feel is one of the best for looking at, maybe toxic elements and things like that.
Yeah. So with regards to especially toxic metal exposure, we do have a variety of collection methodologies and mediums. So blood is standard of care, blood lead, blood mercury, we do offer that. We also offer whole blood is going to be the test for one of the considerations is going to be metal on metal prosthesis. And in those cases, we do see chromium and cobalt. So blood is the test for that. And then you did mention hair testing. We do offer hair testing. Hair testing represents about 3 to 4 months of exposure. And that's an excellent screen. So you can see what someone's been exposed to in the past 3 to 4 months. And then there's urine as a medium as well. Now, urine is providing about 2 weeks of exposure without a chelation agent. And we do offer fecal metals as well. And fecal metals is largely dietary, especially methyl mercury in the feces. And that is going to be about 24 to 48 hours of exposure.
Excellent. The whole realm. That's awesome.
And nutritional status, we're looking at, obviously, in blood chemistry, obviously, there's ways to look at nutritional status through serum and red blood cell or white blood cell levels. What does doctor's data provide for sort of nutritional evaluation?
Yeah, we do provide the RBC elements. So we do offer serum and whole blood, but the RBC elements is the unique aspect, the unique offer there especially with regards to magnesium, sodium, potassium, zinc, those intracellular elements. We do offer that RBC elements test. We're also measuring the elements in hair and urine, and that can provide a different piece of information as those are excretory tissues, but we do have those offers as well.
You guys do blood spot testing?
We do. So we do blood spot for our vitamin D test. So that's an excellent option. And then we also do blood spot testing for our DNA methylation test. So that's going to be the genetic test for MTHFR, COMT, MAO-A, those genetic polymorphisms. So that's available via blood spot. Yes.
All right.
Do you see the future of blood spot testing? Do you see a lot more tests being offered in the future? My understanding is it is expanding.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I believe we will see probably more in the future. Absolutely.
Just out of curiosity, do you run blood chemistries personally on yourself or your families?
Yes, I do. Yeah, the standard.
Just the standard panels, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite biomarker that you like to run?
The GI3C, the microbiome. Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's a rabbit hole. The more and more that I go down that, as Hippocrates said at the beginning, the advent of medicine, all disease begins in the gut. And the more research you do, the more you can find a connection there. So it's quite fascinating. So I would say that's a foundational component for sure.
I saw a little something, just a quick, I didn't dig down at all, but they thought about Parkinson's possibly starting in the gut with a kind of a protein that didn't fold quite correctly. I don't know if you'd seen any of that early research, but again, everybody's looking at the gut first, go to the gut first. And now they're doing that with Parkinson's. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And then I believe there was a study recently that they said that Alzheimer's too is associated with individuals that have IBD, that so there is a connection there for sure with the gut and the brain. And that will be interesting to see if we can potentially offer some therapeutics in that regard at some point.
I had a quick question to go backwards a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah.
With the dairy allergy, did they ever recommend goat's milk or just say no mammal dairy, none?
Yeah.
Sheep's milk, sheep's cheese?
Yeah, good question. So at that time it was none, but as time goes on, I have explored a little bit more and do find that those sheeps and those goats are better, right? Without that, that beta bond. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a smaller animal. It's more sustainable to raise them. And I love Pecorino Romano cheese, which is sheep's milk, the real one.
Yeah.
And I like goat cheese. I do tolerate some cow's milk too. There's some that have been raised by vets, and then I like the way that they're raised better. And of course, if you feed them better, then the milk would be better. And of course, save a cow, use the milk, I guess, is a saying. Or I just made that up, perhaps. So yeah, I'm not 100% against dairy all the way around myself. So, and unfortunately, I don't tolerate a lot of things, and I happen to tolerate dairy. So I do utilize it for my protein in a lot of ways. But I think that the way the animal's fed is so important. So if you have your own sheep or your own goat and you know what you fed it, then you can even improve the quality of that milk.
Definitely.
Yeah. And there was a goat farm up in South Carolina we went to, and they were making everything, making key lime pie tarts if you wanted a treat, goat yogurt. It was kind of neat. And they had the big white dogs that protected the goats. It was a really kind of like self-sustained little farm, and it was awesome. So I really do feel when the animals are fed better and treated better, I think it makes a bit of a difference, instead of factory farming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, there's a big thing of, I don't know if it's over in your neck of the woods, but we have A1, A2 cow's milk. Have you guys ever heard of that?
I've heard of it, and I think it's if you have an immune response to the one that you might tolerate the other better. And I suppose you have to, it would be a hit or miss with that, I think, to try to test it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you can test one. I mean, other than just doing provocation challenges with it and see if it works. But yeah, if I'm going to choose dairy, and I just use little dairy in my coffee, that's about it. I use that A1, A2. I guess it's not I don't know. Anyway.
What if in your cappuccino, though? How you can't make cappuccino?
Well, they do A1, A2 milk. So yeah, you can actually froth it up it actually froths up very nicely. I've got like a little froth anyway, but we don't need to talk about coffee. But
do people love this? I'm sure personal stories.
Yeah, I mean, I eat goat's yogurt. My daughter actually was working on a goat farm this summer here in Southern Oregon and was milking goats and bringing home lots of raw goat's milk. And so having lived in Vermont for 4 years, where dairy is, king and queen over there, and you're driving around, you're seeing real cows living on real fields and having real life experience.
Are they happy cows?
They are. Yeah. My daughter was actually at a boarding school called Putney in Vermont, and they have a working farm, and every student has to take a shift on the farm. So she was getting up at 5 a.m. to milk cows when it was 20 degrees below. And that was just her. And then they had the raw milk in the cafeteria. And, that's really part of their life experiences and really teaches them about what it means to raise and take care of animals and bring their produce to the table. And I think it was a great experience. And she's very much into homesteading. But
wow. Holy cow, that's awesome.
Holy cow, holy goat, holy sheep, holy basil.
Excellent.
Let's bring this back down to kind of like the personal and practical. I'm just kind of curious, are you still seeing patients, or are you mostly just working in the research side of things at Doctor's Data? Maybe you could talk a little bit about your day-to-day work at Doctor's Data. I'm curious about what that's like.
Yeah, I am mostly with Doctor's Data. I do have a concierge practice that's just case by case. And so that's really where I do put together either review of lab reports, or if a patient has a diagnosis of some sort, I do put together essentially a research proposal that they can bring to example their oncologist or something of that nature. So that's on the side. But really, I'm with Doctor's Data, and we are constantly developing lab tests, and I'm working with physicians to review the reports. So that's on the day-to-day. And then also researching whatever is going to be new and upcoming in functional medicine and providing that information via journal articles or presentations in that field. So it's a good amount of research and then a good amount of interface with cases. And generally the cases that I see are going to be, the more complex cases. Another thing that we do is we do take a note of trends, right? So we talked a little bit about the antibiogram data and things of that we are noticing and reporting. And one thing that we noticed, about 2018 was elevated thallium in the urine samples. So that's something that, we're taking a look at and we're diving into evaluate kind of where is the thallium coming from, urine and hair, and blood actually.
So thallium, is it radioactive? Yes. Thallium?
Pardon?
Is it radioactive?
No, not radioactive. We're not testing for radioactive. Great question. Yes. Yeah, our tests generally do not identify the radioactive isotope. So thallium, uranium, these are very common in the Earth's crust. Mm-hmm. So that's really where, generally speaking, they're coming from, is groundwater and things like that. But we did notice a trend that thallium is increasing in the environment. And
did you notice any geographical distribution with that?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
North America, I would say, more than other countries, mm-hmm. but now it's actually increasing. And Beth, you had mentioned that study about the cord blood. Actually, there was a study around 2020, I believe, in that they looked at what the toxins in the placenta, and they all had thallium in them. And thallium is neurotoxic. It displaces potassium and it crosses the placenta. And a study in Canada looked at the over-the-counter prenatal vitamins. Every single over-the-counter prenatal vitamin contained thallium.
Jeez,
by mistake? I mean, intentionally, or?
There's a few different considerations here. I would say at that time, a colleague at Doctor's Data, she went through the great lengths to call the supplement companies that we utilize. And she said, are you guys testing for thallium like you're testing mm-hmm. for lead, mercury, cadmium, et cetera? And they said at the time, no, right? Because thallium's not on the radar the same way that lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic are.
Maybe, it should be. It should be. When you measure, and I asked because I had some experience with measuring radioactive strontium-90, actually in baby mm-hmm. teeth mm-hmm. and in water. So when you pick up thallium, might it be the radioactive isotope, or can you tell that it's not the radioactive isotope? Do you know?
Yeah, I can double check. But I know, for example, strontium, uranium, we are not identifying the radioactive isotope.
So when you see it in bulk, maybe that's the total. I wonder if it could be radioactive and not radioactive, because we talked about displacement. And I always get people, like I say, you got to saturate your tissues with the real nutrient so mm-hmm. you don't take up the radioactive element. In my case, it was the radioactive mm-hmm. element, just like they do with iodine, right? Iodine, if there's a nuclear power plant, you're supposed to have stock iodine, potassium iodide. So I just wondered, because to me, that's a big health issue. Maybe we can talk about that in the future, but it's a big public health issue that is overlooked as well. So mm-hmm. now with thallium itself, even non-radioactive element, thallium itself is toxic. So it should definitely be on the radar.
Yes, exactly.
So you said that you guys were studying this, you said since 2018, is that right?
Yeah.
What sort of conclusions have you come to since then? Are you still seeing it still high?
Yes. So the source at this point largely is going to be dark green leafy vegetables.
Which they get it from the earth, though. We can't blame them.
No, of course, yeah.
Right.
Of course.
Blaming the fish for the mercury. So, so it's somebody put it there and it's toxic. Yes. Well, it's also naturally occurring, you said. But does it also come from industry, or is it all that thallium, do you think, naturally occurring and just getting stirred up, perhaps?
There may be both. So there is a consideration with industrial practices and the contamination of water. And then water that may have been used for fracking can actually be legally used as irrigation for agricultural.
What? Rewind. All right. Oh my gosh.
Okay, maybe you should say that again.
Say that again. Fracking water can be used for irrigation. Oh
Correct.
My God. My boyfriend and I works out in Texas sometimes, and we go out there and Midland, sorry, I'm calling it Midland, but when we got there and went to the hotel, we both got this rash from taking a shower. And people said, don't worry about that. That's just a fracking chemicals getting into the water. And we're like, everybody puts up with this? This is okay with you?
Some people drink it.
And like you're saying, Beth, it is part of the Earth's crust. And there does just seem to be an increasing incidence of exposure. And once it gets into the soil, like you're saying, And once those dark green leafies, they just mop everything up, which makes them, such a great.
So even organic, though, if you grow organically, if you're not testing for thallium, it could be there and it could end up in the organic greens as well.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And there's
strontium. Yeah. Oh, that's frustrating.
All right.
Exactly.
So this stuff's in our bodies. What effect is it having on physiology?
So with regards to thallium, as it displaces potassium, there's considerations for cardiac health, neurological health. A cardinal sign is actually going to be alopecia. But with metal exposure, generally the symptoms can be vast, fatigue, headaches, things like that, myalgia, things like that. Yeah.
And then what can we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
With that metal, the consideration generally is going to be identify and eliminate exposure. So actually any metal, any environmental toxicant, it's going to be identify and eliminate exposure. That's number one. Then number two is we can do exactly kind of what we've been talking about, detoxification. So you had a previous episode about that. So those considerations support endogenous detoxification. With thallium, you can monitor potassium status. Liposomal glutathione is obviously going to be helpful. And then there is one agent for that, but it's not generally utilized, and that's Prussian blue. And Beth, you're likely familiar with that because it's going to be stockpiled.
Feedings, in the feedings, right? In the enteral feedings.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. This is so interesting. I'd love to get into the toxicity part.
Yeah, I had no idea that was even a thing. So thanks for sharing that with everybody.
Could we mention too, I think, because as long as if somebody doesn't have kidney disease, it should be okay, but also to load up on potassium because there should be some competition at the intestine. When you load up on the real nutrient, you tend to take up less of the imposter. So maybe making sure that people's diets are, heavy in potassium as long as their kidneys can handle that. Would that be a good idea?
Yeah. Enjoy your bananas, right?
Yeah, bananas and baked potato, white and sweet. See, the poor white potato, I think, gets a bad rap, but it has like 600 milligrams of potassium. And if you bake it, right, if you boil it, you lose that. But yeah, to tell people, and we have some resources actually that give you lists of potassium and food sources of potassium, food sources of vitamin E and vitamin C and things like that. We'll make sure that that's available.
Yeah. All right.
You had mentioned homesteading. So growing your own and controlling the source of irrigation for your crops, for your dark green leafies, that would actually be a good idea as well.
Yeah, I mean, here in Southern Oregon, a lot of the land has what we call public irrigation, which comes from the high mountain lakes. And so, another horrible thing is that every year Oregon puts out a catalog of all of the lakes where you can go fishing. And it's a recreational release and, tells you a little bit about. And there are so many of these lakes now where they say, limit the amount of fish that you eat caught in these lakes because of PCPs and mercury. And they even say, pregnant women only eat 1 trout per lake. And so it's like you have these vast bodies of water that are, a lot of them are fed from snowmelt. And therefore you've got, a wide distribution of the snow being exposed to the air and things like that, and then flowing into these lakes. And then that comes into the irrigation. So I think unless you know what water you have in your well and you're potentially irrigating out of your well, that's a bit of a crapshoot especially where I live around in just the water that you're irrigating with. And you don't really have control over what's in that water, unfortunately. So I think it's a huge issue, especially on the West, around water, the amount of water, but also the quality of the water that's available for irrigation.
Yeah. My aunt has it in the Northeast, in New England. She has a tabletop. Greens. She grows greens in the winter in a tabletop with a light. Have you had any experience with that, Dr. Malkowski? It sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, that does sound like a good idea. No, I haven't done that, but I've grown sprouts, right, as an alternative.
Yeah.
Just, the sulforaphane and all that. But yeah, it sounds like a good idea.
Well, it's amazing how much lettuce, people always think, lettuce probably comes from California, but there's a huge amount of lettuce comes from southern Canada in Quebec and Ontario. And it's grown under these massive football-sized greenhouses. I'm not sure whether they grow them in controlled soil base or whether it's hydroponic, but it is entirely possible to grow leafy greens and things like that in a controlled environment, I would presume.
The biodome.
The biodome. Yeah.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about or to bring up, and this is a question that we often ask our guests, is like, what are maybe the top 2 practical or tactical things that you see that someone can do to improve their health? And I'm beginning to question whether we should ask them to be eating leafy greens nowadays, but after what you were talking about. But yeah, from your experience, if you were to, no one rides a train anymore. I was just over in Europe and everyone rides trains. Let's say you're sitting in a train, you've got someone opposite you and you're talking about health and wellness. What are two things that you would suggest or make a recommendation that someone can do to quite quickly improve their health? It could be stop doing something or do something. I'm just kind of curious what that would be for you.
Just two?
Well, we can do three. Come on, give us two, and then maybe there'll be a third that can emerge.
No, I can pick two. That's good. Well, I really do believe in the foundational components of health and the basics. So sleep, I would say sleep is probably one of the biggest bang for your buck. You can get the biggest return on an investment with adequate sleep. And I even like to talk to adults about a bedtime routine, right? Because we do that for our children so often, but we don't think about that for us. And a lot of people do struggle with sleep. And once you add a bedtime routine into it and that wind down time, it actually does help to facilitate those natural processes, turn off the lights at dusk, those types of things, warm bath before bed, those little things to give yourself preparation for that adequate sleep, because so much of physiology, the rebuild, the lymphatic system, the hormones, learning, the neuronal connections, so much of that does take place during sleep.
I love sleep. Some people think it's a waste of time and it just kills me when they say that. I said, no, you're restoring and recovering.
Well, it's funny because probably one of our most popular podcasts was on melatonin and darkness deficiency. And she talked about, how most people don't keep their room dark enough. And therefore, you're constantly in a sort of depleted state of melatonin and things like that. So, and I remember when my kids were growing up that we would do, an evening routine. My wife would run a bath for the kids and rub their feet with essential oils and things. Do we do that for ourselves? No, it's like, and I don't think we do it to our adult children now anymore, but
right.
Yeah, no, I love that. The adult bedtime routine. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yes. And a good point too about the darkness is people don't realize if your child is sleeping with a nightlight on, or even as an adult, your brain will receive that as daylight and those processes. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tips was like, if you can hold your hand up in front of your face at night and you can see, even just an outline of your hand, your room isn't dark enough, which is pretty. And a lot of people have like, fire, smoke alarms and things like that, little tiny, and it's amazing how much light that actually puts out. It's a tiny little LED and
absolutely.
All right. So I would say pretty much everybody that we've interviewed has always, sleep is going to be in their top three. So you're keeping the trend going. So that's awesome. All right. What about number two?
Well, number two is based on one of your recent podcasts, the Sarcopenia podcast, because I am, over 40 now. So really thinking about longevity. And with regards to longevity, it does seem that one of the best predictors is muscle mass. So in that regard, I'm thinking about my consumption of dietary protein and constantly experimenting with that. But I'm trying to aim for 1 gram per pound per day. So that's where I'm at with that. And obviously weightlifting and things like that. And we talked about a little bit about,
Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, things like that. So,
just preserving muscle mass.
Yeah. And a routine, an exercise routine, anything you do at home or some quick recommendations?
Yeah. I go running once a week with a group of friends. And I think that it's so important to merge those two things, exercise and socialization. So that's a key to longevity as well. And that's something I think in America, we don't really do too much. It's not a
routine.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. We think of socializing, we think of, going out and staying out late. But I think socializing with friends where you're engaging in an activity is actually very beneficial for health. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Agreed. I love that. Well, one of the things that I've just started doing is Pilates.
Oh, good.
You like?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So doing mat work and then getting on the reformer. And it's funny because my sister's been a Pilates instructor for many, many years. And I've never taken a class. She's over in England, but I've never taken a class with her. And I finally said to her, I said, Becca, I've started doing Pilates. She said, finally, you never do it when I'm around. So anyway, but I'm finding that, and also doing it in a group experience as well. I always sort of shunned kind of group exercise and thought, it's not really for me, but it's actually quite fun when you've got 5 reformers and everyone's doing the same exercise. I sort of feel like there's a sort of camaraderie in the group. So yeah, I like that idea of community exercise. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's more difficult than it looks. The Pilates is, right?
Oh yeah, I'm constantly like waking up and my abs are like very sore. So it's like working on that core. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Had some crunches.
Yeah. All right, Beth, what's something that you new and different that you're doing?
Dr. Malkowski or me?
No, you.
Me? Well, I do my thing. I have my little thing in the morning. I listen to NPR and I take about 10 minutes to do my
You do like
crunches.
500 crunches.
600. Right?
600, sorry.
10 minutes, 600 crunches.
Wow.
And then I go out, I dug myself a little beach and I do my beach yoga. And then I walk for about usually 1.5 miles, 2 miles in the morning. And then bike a couple of miles at night and do yoga again at night and some more crunches. This is such a routine. I did start doing something though, let me say. When I brush my teeth, I have a 2-minute timer. I started to do these like little squats in the doorway. Just hold on with one hand to the frame and not too deeply so you don't hurt your knees. But let me tell you that I can do it for about a minute and that's almost it. But I can feel it. And I have like kind of solid thighs and I really do feel it in the back area and the thigh area. So these little squats while you brush your teeth could be a quick, easy routine.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, it works. And I do it automatically now. And I do get to brush my teeth twice a day when I'm a good girl. So I'm doing that for 1 minute twice a day. And I'll tell you something, if you feel it. So it's worth a try. Just don't overstretch your knees. Don't overstress your knees. That's fun.
My chiropractor's recommended getting I don't know how big this thing is, maybe like 1.5 feet square. It's like a foam pad that you stand on. And he said, while you're brushing your teeth, put the pad out and just stand on one leg.
Oh, wow.
So it's part of what you were talking about, Julia, of like, how do we, as we're getting older, how do we improve our balance and proprioception and facilitate, small adjustments in the micro muscles that sort of hold us and stabilize us? I tell you, it's hard. You stand on one leg brushing your teeth and then even kind of get into a simple squat. And then when I got one of those toothbrushes that beeps at me. So when it does 2 beeps, I know a minute's up, then I'll switch to the other leg. I mean, it's, I think you're absolutely right, Beth. It's like anything that we can do to sort of pay attention to our bodies, do something good for ourselves. Brushing your teeth is a great opportunity. You're kind of captive for 2 minutes. Why not do something? Yeah, pretty cool.
Oh, I forgot too. My couch potato. It's just my couch potato routine. Couch potato fitness routine. I have a big, thick mat and I put it on top of the couch. And I actually sometimes, if I don't get to ride a bike, do little just press with your heels in, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, like you're bicycling. And I'm feeling that in the front of my thighs. So I'm watching the news and doing that or some crunches. So I think, you can incorporate these little things into your everyday routine and it becomes simple and you don't have to think about it.
Very cool. Okay, Julia, what else would you like to share with our audience today? Any books you've written, any podcasts you're doing, this is an opportunity for sort of shameless promotion of your own work.
Well, I will say I had an article published in the Townsend Letter recently about moving beyond the concept of testing and treating bacteria to testing and addressing bacteria and really thinking about the historical perspectives about the hunter-gatherer diet and how that was actually employed versus how it is represented and commercialized today. And using microbiome testing to really analyze where you're at and address that. So that's always fascinating, understanding, really the foundational component of us as humans and putting that into a modern context.
Well, congratulations.
We can find that article.
Yeah. Tell us where people can get hold of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's at the Townsend Letter on their website. So you can go in there and you can search up Julia Malkowski.
Do they still print the Townsend Letter? I remember my local health food store used to have the Townsend Letter years ago.
On paper.
On paper, like really thin paper as well.
Yeah, this is in the last printed one.
Really?
So,
the last one? You're in the last version? Wow.
Wait, you're the last one ever or you're in the last
printed.
one and they'll do another one?
They're printed, so they are no longer printing.
That's the last.
So it's the last printed one ever. Wow.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
interesting time.
Doctor's Data going to any conferences that you might be at? People could come and say hi?
Yes, I will actually be tomorrow at A4M in Chicago. So I will be there. And then I will be at A4M next month in Boston, the cardiometabolic.
A4M, that's always a fun one to go to.
Yeah, it is. It's great. Yeah, it's great to be with colleagues and further the practice of what we're doing and put all our great minds together. So yeah, it's great.
Well, Dr. Mikowski, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of your insights and wisdom and bringing Thallium to the attention and for sharing all of that. So really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to share that with us. Beth, any parting words?
Just no, thank you again for carrying the light and bringing more people to this, treating themselves better, I guess you could say. So thank you.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. And thanks for tuning into Optimal Podcast. And we will be with you in another episode very soon. Until then, take care, be well, stay optimal.